Hello, church family. We are kicking off our Easter series following the last weeks of Jesus before he was crucified and resurrected. This week, we're looking at one of the last miracles Jesus performed, the raising of Lazarus. This was a crucial moment in Jesus' ministry, and the consequences of what he did were pretty severe. Hopefully, you've had a chance to read through and discuss the story. And whether this is the first time you've heard it or you're very familiar with it, there is so much to unpack. I'm pretty sure we could spend an entire series just on this one chapter from the Gospel of John. But today, as we think about the approaching events of the Easter story, there are just 2 points I want to make. The first is that death is allowed to be awful even when resurrection is coming. The second is that resurrection is disruptive. So first, I want to look at one of the 3 responses we're given to Lazarus' death. We see that Mary falls at Jesus' feet, overcome by grief and disappointment. Jesus himself gets angry, and then he too weeps. But Martha responds differently. Like her sister, she says, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." But then she says, "But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask." This is a pretty astonishing statement of faith. And that's not all. Jesus then says, "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe?" And Martha says, "Yes." I think it would be so easy to read Martha's reaction as the proper reaction. Here we have someone responding to death with utter faith and trust in Jesus, which at this point is a pretty big deal, and to be honest, still is. But I think there might be more going on here. See, Martha is the doer. I imagine her as the one who keeps it all together, who manages the chaos by staying in control. Even now, faced with the death of her brother, Martha is trying to stay in control, controlling her emotions, rationalizing her disappointment. Jesus tries to tell her that Lazarus will live, and she kind of dismisses him, saying, "I know he will be resurrected on the final day." But Jesus is telling her that it's happening now. And even though she says she believes, she's still bracing for disappointment. Do you ever do that? Rationalize away your pain by trying to tell yourself it will all work out in the end, telling yourself God is in control, but then bracing for disappointment. Because I do that all the time. I cover up my doubt and my disappointment because I feel like it means I have less faith. But the problem is, those doubts and disappointments end up bleeding out anyway. I mean, look at Martha. She tells Jesus she believes he can do anything. But when Jesus tells them to roll away the stone, it's Martha who objects. She says, "No, it's going to smell bad," and I don't blame her. She's still trying to maintain control. But there is a freedom that we can find in the face of death, a freedom to feel what we feel and express sorrow or grief, or even to say nothing at all. In fact, in church tradition, the day between Good Friday and Easter Sunday is called Holy Saturday. And in the gospel accounts, nothing happens. There is utter silence from the burial of Jesus on Friday to his resurrection on Sunday. We may know how the story ends, but they didn't. Now, all of this can feel a little heavy, but I don't think it has to be. My encouragement today is to use Martha's response as a reminder that we don't have to have it all together. We don't have to have all the answers. We don't have to hide our disappointment that despite Easter Sunday, we are still living in the messy middle, in that bit between death and resurrection where Martha found herself, in our own holy, often silent Saturday. Now, I want to practice what I preach and resist an easy way to tie up this point. But what I will say is that I think it's in those silences, when we've been honest about our disappointment and our frustration, that God can speak and begin to do something genuinely new, to bring new life. It makes me think of Genesis, at the very beginning of everything. Genesis says, "Darkness was over the deep, and the Spirit hovered over the waters. Then God spoke, 'Let there be light.'" It was in the very silence at the beginning of the world that God was able to speak new life. And it is in the silence of Saturday, the awful silence in the wake of the death of Christ, that God is able to make the world new. This is exactly what he does for Lazarus. The stone is rolled away. Lazarus is raised from the dead. Surely now is the time for rejoicing, right? Well, what happens when Jesus does something radically new, radically different from the way things have gone before, isn't exactly what we would expect. Because if we accept death as the way of things, if we brace ourselves for disappointment, then resurrection is radically disruptive, especially to those of us who want to stay in control. Jesus' raising of Lazarus from the dead gets the religious leaders really nervous. And the thing is, I understand their fear. I think we're often too quick to dismiss them, but their main concern is that because of Jesus, the Romans will come and take away their temple. They say, if we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and then the Romans will come and take away both our temple and our nation. Something that we may not think about a lot as Christians is the importance of the temple for the Jewish people at this time. Because the temple was where the Lord lived. It was the place where God had promised he would be. It was his presence. It was where the Jewish people could meet with God himself, which, by the way, gives deeper meaning to the fact that Jesus called himself the temple. But that's another message. These religious leaders would have grown up with stories of the exile of their people, of their enslavement, stories of how their temple had been destroyed once before, and what that meant for God's presence or believed absence among them. Is it any wonder that they were terrified of that happening again? This is the catalyst, the fear that they will lose everything all over again, that prompts them to seek Jesus' life once and for all. And the thing is, I believe Caiaphas really did think he was doing this for the good of his people, for the good of the people that he wanted to protect. And he thought he was preserving something sacred. Friends, how often do we do this? How often do we cling to what is familiar because we are terrified of losing control, terrified of the consequences of truly surrendering to the work of God in our lives, surrendering to the fact that God might want to do something different, something new, something unexpected, something uncontrollable in our lives. The thing is, we know how these stories end. We know that resurrection comes, and so it can be easy to brush over these things and rush straight to Easter. But as we approach the cross of Friday, the silence of Saturday, and the resurrection on Sunday, my prayer for all of us is that we would come to these events with fresh eyes, that we would allow these next 2 weeks to bring new truth to familiar stories. I pray that we have the courage to be honest before God with our disappointment and the courage to surrender, to allow God to do something genuinely new in our lives. God bless you.